The committee will now proceed to consideration of the bill H.R. 8606 for amendment. The bill was circulated in advance and printed copies are available. The clerk shall designate the bill.
H.R. 8606, a bill to reauthorize the Director of the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum to support Holocaust education programs and for other purposes.
Without objection, the first reading of the bill is dispensed with. Without objection, the bill will be considered as read and open for amendment at any point, and any amendment offered shall be considered as read. Mr. Wilson, for what purpose do you seek recognition?
Madam Chairwoman, I have an amendment at the desk entitled H.R. 8606 ANS.
The clerk shall designate the amendment in the nature of a substitute.
Amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 8606 offered by Mr. Wilson of South Carolina. Identifier H8606_ANS.
Without objection, the amendment shall be considered original text for purposes of further amendment. The amendment in the nature of a substitute has already been distributed. I now recognize Congressman Wilson for 5 minutes to explain the amendment in the nature of a substitute.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. I am grateful to be one of the lead co-sponsors of the, quote, Never Again Education Reauthorization and Study Act. I applaud Representative Buddy Carter for introducing this legislation and Representative Kathy Manning of North Carolina and the other co-sponsors of the bill for their leadership on these issues. This amendment removes language related to elementary schools from the new study and report authorized by the bill. The Holocaust Museum expressed concern about including elementary schools in this study given their concerns with the teaching of the Holocaust in elementary schools. The amendment also adds new language to ensure the study determines criteria used by states and school districts to evaluate the effectiveness of Holocaust education programs. I know this is a particular priority for Representative Lisa McClain, and I thank her for her work with this. This is a good amendment, and I urge its adoption. I also urge my colleagues to support the underlying bill. Since the Never Again Education Act was enacted in 2020, the Holocaust Museum has been developing and disseminating resources to states, school districts, and schools to be used in the instruction about the Holocaust. These materials deal with the facts of the Holocaust and how and why the Holocaust happened, and this bill will extend the Holocaust Museum work through FY 2030. This bill also directs the Holocaust Museum to study the extent to which states and school districts are effectively implementing Holocaust education within their curriculum. As we deal with the explosion of anti-Semitism tragically on our college campuses, it's critically important that we examine the extent to which states and school districts are teaching students about the Holocaust and its anti-Semitic roots. Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, and I urge all my colleagues to support the Never Again Education Reauthorization Act of 2024. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. Ms. Manning, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to thank my good friend, the gentleman from South Carolina, Representative Joe Wilson, for offering this amendment in the nature of a substitute. I strongly support H.R. 8606 ANS, the Never Again Education Reauthorization Act, bipartisan legislation I was proud to help introduce with Representative Buddy Carter of Georgia. We have witnessed a major increase in anti-Semitism across our country in recent years, but since the horrific Hamas terrorist attack on Israel on October 7th, this hatred has exploded. According to the Anti-Defamation League, anti-Semitic incidents have increased by more than 360% in the 3 months following October 7th. We have seen the impact of the rise in anti-Semitism in our K-12 schools and on college campuses across the country. Too many young people know too little about the Holocaust and the long history of anti-Jewish hatred. According to a 2020 Claims Conference survey, 63% of U.S. millennials and Gen Z do not know that 6 million Jews were murdered during the Holocaust. Additionally, 12% of U.S. millennials and Gen Z have never heard about or do not think they have heard the word Holocaust before. In addition, in its very first report to Congress under the Never Again Education Act, the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum noted the most striking finding was the lack of student knowledge about the Holocaust. In the educator-centered surveys, both experienced and inexperienced secondary teachers reported that close to 40% of their students had no familiarity with the Holocaust. In the fight against bigotry, ignorance, and intolerance, education is one of the most powerful tools we have. Education about the Holocaust and about the history of anti-Semitism is vital because it can help teach students about how to be moral citizens. It allows them to learn valuable lessons about bearing witness, building tolerance and civic values, the importance of democracy, and the responsibility we all have to confront hate wherever we find it, to speak up instead of being silent bystanders. That is why Congress passed the Never Again Education Act in 2020, and why we must work together on a bipartisan basis to ensure this critical work continues for another 5 years. This bill would extend support for Holocaust education across the nation, continuing the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum's strong track record of providing resources for our educators and developing the best methods of conveying these vital lessons to future generations. I am particularly glad this bipartisan reauthorization includes an important study based on the HEAL Act, introduced by our colleague, Representative Josh Gottheimer of New Jersey, to ensure that the programs authorized are actually achieving their intended learning outcomes in all 50 states across the country. So in closing, I strongly support the ANS and the bill, and I urge all my colleagues to join me in voting for it, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, Ms. Manning. Mr. Wahlberg, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. I rise in strong support of H.R. 8606, which would authorize or reauthorize the Never Again Education Act, which was signed into law by President Trump in 2020. With anti-Semitism on the rise in the United States, especially on our so-called prestigious college campuses, it is critical that we reflect on what ignorance and anti-Semitism left unchecked leads to. Not even a century ago, the Nazis brutally and systematically murdered over 6 million Jews in the largest genocide ever. Nevertheless, Holocaust denial and distortion is on the rise. We must commit now to upholding our commitment to never again. Demonstrators at Columbia University earlier this year outrageously called for Jews to return to Poland. On other campuses, we've heard phrases chanted related to the Nazis' final solution and other tragically misguided sentiment that glorifies the Holocaust and harming of Jews. In a poll from December of last year, it was revealed that 1/5 of U.S. citizens between the ages of 18 and 29 believe that the Holocaust is a myth. We must confront this dangerous ignorance head on. Further, as the Jewish state continues fighting for its existence against Hamas, we are again reminded of the real dangers ignorance and anti-Semitism leads to. Madam Chair, this bill would make sure that the United States Holocaust Museum has the funding and resources it needs to promote understanding of the Holocaust. This bill would also task the Holocaust Museum to examine Holocaust education in schools across the nation, including in my own. Having had the opportunity to view how some states educate their students on the Holocaust, I think many states and school districts would benefit with a better knowledge about teaching methods and best practices in other states. And hopefully this bill will help facilitate that understanding about the Holocaust. I urge my colleagues to support H.R. 8606, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Wahlberg. Ms. McBath, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move to strike the last word.
For 5 minutes.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here today to ensure that this important legislation is reauthorized before it expires. As time goes on, the memories of those that have been killed in the Holocaust and the survivors who have since survived, we have to make sure that their memories, and we have to make sure that what has happened through the Holocaust, that is not lost. We have seen troubling reports on Americans' knowledge of the Holocaust, and we must take as many important steps as we possibly can to make sure that we reverse this very dangerous trend. When Dwight Eisenhower first toured a concentration camp, he insisted that it be documented as meticulously as possible. And he said, and I'll quote, "Get it all on record now. Get it on the films. Get the witnesses, because somewhere down the road of history, someone will get up and say that this never happened," end quote. It is truly up to all of us to ensure that the memory of millions of innocent men, women, and children murdered in the Holocaust lives on. During their reign of terror, the Nazis made a concerted effort to not only destroy those they deemed inferior, but erase their memory and their cultures from the face of the earth. And as a woman of color, an African-American woman, I understand that on levels that many people will never understand. Millions of Jews, Poles, homosexual men, Roma, and even black people were sterilized, experimented upon, and murdered solely because of who they were and how and where they were born. At Yad Vashem, which I've had the honor of visiting in person, the Hall of Names serves as the only grave marker for millions of Jews murdered in the Holocaust. Of the 6 million dead, there are still roughly 1 million people that have yet to be identified. 1 million people who are denied justice in life and continue to be denied justice in their death. That is who we are fighting for with this legislation like this today, to ensure that we honor their memory and take steps to stop hate before it results in irreversible atrocities. In the words of Elie Wiesel, and I quote her, "To forget the dead would be akin to killing them a second time," end quote. I thank the chairwoman for marking this up today, and I look forward to supporting it in committee today and look forward to passing it on the House floor, and I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. McBath. Ms. McLean, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
I speak in support of the Never Again Education and Reauthorization Study Act. The United States Holocaust Memorial Museum is the gold standard in educating Americans about the evils of anti-Semitism and reminding us why never again must truly mean never again. Excuse me. This legislation directs the Holocaust Museum to study the types of Holocaust education programs across the nation to ensure we educate our children on anti-Semitism and, more importantly, how to fight against it. I thank Mr. Carter for sponsoring this bill and Chairwoman Fox and Ranking Member Scott for working with my office to include language directing the museum to compile criteria used by states and schools to evaluate the effectiveness of their Holocaust education programs, because we must be focused on outcomes. I've been fortunate to have the opportunity to visit the Holocaust education programs, and a few of them, such as Morris Life in Florida. Morris Life's programs have been incredibly successful in educating children about the Holocaust and anti-Semitism. They support teachers with a fully developed curriculum using real stories from the Holocaust survivors and their descendants. See, it's not just enough to have a program, but we must put criteria in place that measures the outcome so we are getting the desired results. As the committee continues to investigate anti-Semitism in schools, it is critical that we look at which programs are most effective in educating children about anti-Semitism and use benchmarking to do so. We need to assess whether Holocaust curriculum is actually moving the needle, right? Actually making sure we're getting value for our dollar. Do they understand the history and hatred fueled by the Holocaust? Does the curriculum give the students the tools to fight anti-Semitism? And are the teachers being supported as they teach this very difficult subject? In Congress, it is important that we talk about most successful programs and promote those programs as models for states and school districts across the country. I thank Mr. Carter again for introducing this bipartisan legislation, and I look forward to working with the committee to promote effective Holocaust education programs across the country. And thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. McLean. Ms. Bonamici, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. I move to strike the last word and speak in favor of the bill.
You're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I rise in support of the Never Again Education Reauthorization Act. My home state of Oregon does have Holocaust education, and we do have curriculum about the Holocaust, and it happened because of Alter Wiener. Alter Wiener was who died in 2018 at the age of 92 years old. Was born in Poland and spent 3 years in 5 different concentration camps. And when he came to Oregon and settled there, he wrote a book called From a Name to a Number, a Holocaust Survivor's Autobiography. And because of the power of his story, he spoke in more than 1,000 places, including in Oregon schools. There he met Claire Samowski when she was only in elementary school. And his work was so powerful that she, in fact, wrote a book called Remember My Story, A Girl, a Holocaust Survivor, and a Friendship That Made History. So we know when we hear these stories, when students hear these stories, it makes a difference. I just wanted to raise that, Madam Chair, that my state of Oregon has this requirement, has curriculum in large part because of Alter Wiener. May his memory be a blessing, and I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Bonamici. Mr. Scott, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to thank the gentleman from South Carolina for introducing the amendment in nature of a substitute. I was honored to work with our former colleague from New York, Carolyn Maloney, to get the original Never Again Education Act passed in the House. It passed in 2020 by an overwhelming vote of 393 to 5, and was soon passed by the Senate and signed into law. It's important that we continue to recognize the need to educate our students about the horrors of the Holocaust, and as we saw in the celebrations of the 80th anniversary of D-Day earlier this month, the generation that has firsthand memories of World War II is nearly completely gone. And there'll be a time in the near future when there will be no more living veterans who liberated concentration camps and no more living survivors of the Shoah. It is up to us to make sure these stories live on and help educate our students so they can learn accurate, comprehensive history of these events, and so we must never forget. And these lessons will be prepared by the Holocaust Museum, just like lessons on African American history are prepared by the African American Museum of History and Culture in the 400 Years of African American History Commission, and by providing lessons this way so that they're made available to schools, we can maintain our policy of not mandating any curriculum, but this curriculum is certainly available. And as it's been pointed out, many take advantage of this information. So I'll urge my colleagues to support the ANS and the underlying bill, and thank the chair. Yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, Mr. Scott. Are there any other members who wish to be recognized for further discussion on the amendment in the nature of a substitute? There being no further discussion on the amendment in the nature of a substitute, the committee will move to consideration of amendments. There being no amendments, the question now occurs on the amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 8606. All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the amendment in the nature of a substitute is agreed to. We'll now move to consider the next bill.